In this segment, I will provide a brief overview of the probation violation guidelines. Probation violations are not to be scored as additional offenses on the sentencing guidelines for new offenses. If you have a defendant who's being sentenced for a new felony conviction at the same time that they are being sentenced for a probation violation, then both the sentencing guidelines for the new felony conviction and the sentencing revocation report to identify the reasons for the probation violation must be submitted to the court. Now, the current supervision period is defined as beginning when the defendant was most recently placed on or continued on supervised probation. For example, in January, you have a defendant who's placed on supervised probation. In March, the probation officer requests a capias. In June, a hearing is held, and during this hearing, the defendant is found not to be in violation and continued on supervised probation. And today, you are requesting a capias. When it comes time to complete and submit the probation violation guidelines, the current supervision period begins back in June when the defendant was most recently continued on supervised probation. You cannot go back and rehash any of the alleged violations from the previous period of supervision, as the court already made a decision about those violations in June. Now, the rules I'm going to go over can be found in the Sentencing Revocation Report and Probation Violation Guidelines Manual. The Sentencing Revocation Report, or SRR cover sheet, must be completed for all felony suspended sentence violations. Just make sure that you indicate the type of revocation on the SRR cover sheet. As with the regular guidelines, there is only one set of probation violation guidelines and/or sentencing revocation report submitted for each revocation sentencing event. Now, there are two types of violations. There's a Condition 1 violation, also known as a new law violation, and technical violations, which refers to Conditions 2 through 11. If Condition 1 violation is cited, then the probation violation guidelines do not apply. Now, in addition to Condition 1 violations, probation violation guidelines do not apply for deferred findings or sentences. In these cases, you would have to prepare the original sentencing guidelines. Probation violation guidelines also do not apply if the defendant is parole eligible, if it's a revocation other than state probation, or the defendant was removed from CCAP. You would simply complete the sentencing revocation report, check the box indicating that probation violation guidelines do not apply, and indicate the reason. Now, when only technical violations are cited and there's no new law violation, then the probation violation guidelines must be submitted. Now, the rules for scoring the probation violation guidelines begin on page 13 of the manual with a glossary of terms. Here you will find detailed rules about scoring the various factors along with definitions for the various factors. Additionally, on pages 20 and 22, you will find more specific rules for scoring sections A and C. Now, the factors on sections A and C are pretty straightforward. So for the remainder of this segment, I will just briefly review some of the unique factors that you will find on the worksheets. Now, our rule for submitting the probation violation guidelines is that the probation violation guidelines be submitted within 30 days of the revocation hearing. The reason for that is that some of the factors on the worksheets are time sensitive. And if you submit the probation violation guidelines prior to 30 days of the revocation hearing, then some of those factors can change, which would have an impact on the recommendation. Now, if the sentencing revocation report was submitted when the capias was requested for new law violations, you must make sure that at the violation hearing, the judge has an updated sentencing revocation report. Now, the first factor on both section A and C asks to assign points if the original disposition was incarceration. Points are assigned for this factor if the original disposition included an active jail or prison sentence, the defendant was sentenced to time served, or if they were sentenced to the detention or diversion programs, or CCAP. For the new arrest factor, summons are counted the same as an arrest, and each count in an arrest event is equal to one arrest. For example, if in July the defendant was arrested on the same day for an assault and disorderly conduct, that would count as 2 arrests. What is not scored for this factor are arrests for probation violations or traffic infractions, as traffic infractions are not scored anywhere on the sentencing guidelines. On Section A, for the factor never reported to or unsuccessful discharge from the following programs, programs with substance abuse treatment are not scored. On Section C, for the factor months until first noncompliant incident, is scored based on the first time the defendant's behavior violated probation conditions or any other conditions authorized by the court or imposed by the probation officer. We would score this factor even if that incident was handled in-house. For example, if a defendant misses an office visit and during the next office visit they are given a verbal reprimand, we would score this as a non-compliant incident. Even if it was not cited as a condition violated, it does not have to be mentioned in the MVR for it to be scored, but it does have to be mentioned in the probation officer's case log notes. We do recommend that you mention this in the MVR so the court understands where the date came from. Now in Section C, for the factor never reported to drug treatment or drug education programs, there's 2 ways points can be assigned. Points are assigned if the defendant fails to attend intake or the defendant attended intake but did not attend any treatment sessions. Points are not assigned for treatment that solely addresses alcohol abuse, and points will not be assigned if the defendant attended at least 1 treatment session. For the factor time absconded is calculated from the last time the probation officer knew of the defendant's whereabouts up until the day of the revocation hearing. Now, once you complete the guidelines, record the recommendation on the sentencing revocation report cover sheet. If you use SWIFT, which is the official way to complete guidelines, SWIFT will automatically populate the recommendation for you. So what is the time frame for submitting probation violation guidelines to the court? For the answer, text VCSC PVG to 56512. If you have any questions about scoring probation violation guidelines, feel free to call, text, or email staff at the Commission, and we will be happy to assist you.